Those shares of yours, useless now. That's what Martin said, right before sliding the waiver across the table like he was handing over a cocktail menu. No greeting, no context. Just that smug grin like he'd already won, like I was supposed to choke down the insult and say thank you. I didn't touch the pen, didn't even blink. I just stared at the corner of the document where someone had tried to quietly backdate a clause I never signed. His voice faded, the air around us thick with something I recognized too well. Arrogance born from ignorance, the kind that gets people sued, or worse, sidelined in a footnote nobody wants to be remembered by. And hey, before we go any further, quick reminder. If you're listening and getting pulled in, please take 2 seconds to hit that subscribe button and like the video. It means more than you think and helps us keep these stories coming. 97% of people forget. Don't be one of them. Now, back to that waiver. See, Martin didn't know I was the reason this entire merger hadn't already collapsed under its own paperwork. Every quarter for the past 10 years, I sat in a little side room while the board's golden boys pat themselves on the back. I wasn't there for applause. I was there for the fine print, the kind of legal guardrails no one appreciates until the bus is already in the ditch. They called them shares. But what I held wasn't ordinary equity. It was preferred Class F, a blocker share. One clause buried in the original issuance made it clear any merger, acquisition, or sale over $50 million needed my explicit affirmative consent. Not implied, not assumed, not forged. Consent. Back when I negotiated it, Martin hadn't even been CEO. He was still doing TED Talks about streamlining leadership hierarchies and disruption theory. Cute stuff. Meanwhile, I was negotiating indemnity clauses with outside counsel who read Latin for fun. When the board's general counsel pushed for my compliance oversight role a decade ago, it came with a line in the contract that seemed innocuous enough. For any transaction exceeding threshold limits, the consent of the designated Class F holder is mandatory. They thought it was a formality. I treated it like gospel. So when legal sent me a quiet FYI that a clause had been adjusted in the latest merger documentation and marked my sign-off as pending, I didn't panic. I checked the red line log. Sure enough, someone had reworded the language, but the date tag didn't match. The edit had been logged 3 days before the document was officially drafted. Whoever made the change was sloppy. Probably thought no one would check the metadata, but I did. I sent a calm email to Martin, just the facts. Please confirm the rationale behind this clause revision. Note that my consent is pending. That was it. No drama, no threats, just a spark I knew would either get buried or detonate. It took him 4 days to respond. Not through legal, not even through my assistant. He marched right into the audit floor, flanked by his executive VP and a junior HR observer, and handed me that waiver, like he was doing me a favor. He said my shares were symbolic. Legacy, non-voting. Vestigial, I think was the word he used. I almost laughed, because buried in my desk drawer in a locked cabinet was a notarized copy of the original issuance document, stamped, signed, and filed with the Delaware Division of Corporations, with my name on it. Under Class F Custodian Holder. I didn't argue. I didn't flinch. I just stood up, looked him in the eye, and said, I'll defer to the original issuance terms. Feel free to verify with counsel. Then I left the waiver right where he left it, on the table, and walked out of the room. What Martin didn't know, or refused to believe, was that the second he tried to force my removal, he triggered a clause even he couldn't rewrite. The ink on the waiver wasn't even dry. You could still smell the printer toner. That's how fast they were trying to push it. No letterhead, no date, not even a paragraph break, just one lazy sentence pretending to undo a decade of legal infrastructure. The undersigned waives all rights pertaining to preferred Class F status in relation to pending corporate transactions. That was it. Like I was supposed to skim it between meetings and toss my signature on out of habit. Martin didn't sit down. He hovered, arms crossed, chin up, looking down at me like a substitute teacher threatening detention. The conference room was freezing, probably on purpose. Cold air is supposed to rush decisions, keep you uncomfortable. They teach that trick in negotiation boot camps where guys like Martin pay 10 grand to learn how to stand like a cobra. I didn't reach for the pen. I looked at the certificate code instead, top corner of the waiver, printed in gray. F-004, my original share class, assigned during the 2013 restructuring. We'd added it to satisfy a governance safeguard the board insisted on. At the time, the clause was insurance. Now, it was a fuse. You don't need to read all that, Martin said, gesturing to the page. It's boilerplate. Just sign. It helps clean up the cap table. The words clean up made me smile. That was the whole game, wasn't it? Make things look neat, smooth, shiny, especially for the acquirer. No weird legacy holdouts. No stubborn equity vestiges with buried clauses. Just a clean sheet of names, titles, and percentages. Pity for him, I didn't build my career on clean sheets. Those shares of yours, he said again, leaning closer, they're ceremonial, legacy fluff. The merger's going through whether you bless it or not. I looked him in the eye. No smile, no fury either. Just that hum I always get in my chest when I know I'm standing on a wire and someone else is about to step off it blindfolded. They were issued under Class F, I said quietly. You might want to verify the threshold clause tied to my signature. He laughed. Not because he thought I was joking, because he thought I was bluffing, the kind of corporate laugh that doesn't reach the eyes. He'd already convinced himself the clause didn't matter, that someone in legal had checked, that I was a formality, an obstacle easily swept aside with a 3-sentence waiver and a condescending smirk. What he didn't know, what no one outside legal and one very stubborn board member remembered, was that Class F wasn't about ownership or payout. It was a key card, a kill switch. The clause was written in plain English. No merger or acquisition exceeding $50 million may proceed without the explicit, documented consent of the designated Class F holder. Not implied consent, not silence, explicit consent. And mine wasn't going to be given. Not like this. Not because some spreadsheet junkie wanted to pretend history didn't exist. Not because Martin Hale was trying to bury me under the weight of his ego and a premature champagne toast. I stood up slowly, tucked my hands into the pockets of my blazer, let the waiver sit on the table like a dead fish. Martin stepped back, probably waiting for a fight, a protest, a meltdown, something he could twist into uncooperative behavior in the exit paperwork. But I just said, I'll defer to the original issuance terms. Feel free to verify with counsel. Then I walked out. And as the door shut behind me, I saw his reflection in the glass wall. He wasn't laughing anymore. He was staring at the waiver, like maybe, just maybe, it wasn't the shield he thought it was. Maybe it was a trigger, and maybe I'd just pulled it. The subject line read, friendly reminder, Class F waiver. The body was worse. As discussed, assuming silence means agreement. Let us know if anything's needed to formalize the file. A junior legal assistant named Morgan. 2 months out of law school, probably. The kind of email that tries to sound breezy but reeks of cover-your-ass desperation. I reread it once, then dragged it into my archive folder. No reply. No need. Because what they'd just done wasn't a soft nudge. It was a shove into a regulatory tripwire I had spent 10 years quietly maintaining. By noon, the real blow landed. A letter couriered from Martin's office, not emailed, printed, sealed, stamped, signed like they were proud of it. Inside, a thank you for your service memo from the office of the CEO, officially confirming my off-boarding from the Merger Oversight Committee effective 3 days prior. 3 days prior. They'd backdated my removal. They wanted to pretend I'd already left the room when the revised merger packet was circulated. A nice clean cut, like I never held a vote, never read a clause, never stood in the way. The arrogance of it would have been funny if it hadn't been so predictable. See, that move? That was the trigger. Not the waiver, not the silence, the removal. Because buried in the governance manual, buried even deeper in the amended certificate of designation, filed with the Delaware Division of Corporations, was a sentence Martin either never read or foolishly dismissed. It read, any removal of the designated Class F representative, if not preceded by formal cause and board majority vote, shall result in immediate deal suspension pending independent arbitration. In simple terms, if they took me out without cause, the merger was dead in the water until a neutral arbiter reviewed it. No arbitration, no merger. And arbitration couldn't begin without me signing a specific release, which of course I had no intention of doing. I didn't gloat, didn't call anyone, didn't so much as pour a drink. I just printed a copy of the thank you letter, stapled it to Morgan's email, and filed them both in my folder titled Break Glass. At 4:37 p.m., the internal wiki updated silently. The merger page changed status from in progress to hold governance review. Someone in legal must have realized what happened. Someone must have finally pulled up the archived certificate of designation and saw the clause blinking at them like a red stoplight. I'd only shown that clause to 3 people in my entire career: the board secretary, our former GC, and the compliance intern who helped me draft the filing back in 2015. Everyone else assumed Class F was just decorative, like some antique title inherited from old bylaws nobody bothered to update. But I knew what it was, and I kept it alive. Renewed it every fiscal year, logged every adjustment with time-stamped backups, even uploaded a notarized copy to a public-facing record on the Delaware filing site, under my own login, because I don't believe in invisible safeguards. I believe in paper trails, and that paper trail was about to wrap itself like a noose around Martin's neck. I logged off early that day. No texts, no phone calls, just silence. They'd pulled the trigger. Now they'd have to sit through the blast. By Thursday morning, the air around the deal had gone stale. Everyone was still smiling, but no one was blinking. That's how you can tell something's gone wrong in corporate, when people start holding their breath between conference calls. I wasn't in the room, of course. I wasn't even on the calendar anymore. But from the silence echoing off my phone, I could feel it unraveling. I got the first hint when the paralegal from our outside counsel, someone I hadn't heard from since the annual ethics audit, sent a one-liner. "Hey, just checking, do you have a signed copy of the Class F waiver on file?" No greeting, no sign-off, just that, which told me everything. Because if they were asking me, it meant no one else could find it. And if they couldn't find it, they sure as hell hadn't attached it to the diligence packet. Within hours, I heard from a second source, this time a friend in vendor compliance. Quiet lunch meetup. He leaned in over a half-finished sandwich and muttered, "Their legal team paused the process. Something about governance not aligning with the checklist." Governance, that word always shows up right before someone gets fired or someone gets sued. Turns out the acquiring firm's legal counsel, those bright-eyed sharks from Candler Roth, had gone line by line through the merger packet and cross-referenced every required sign-off. When they hit the Class F clause, they did what any half-decent team would do, request documented proof of waiver. And there wasn't any. Not in the shared drive, not in the due diligence vault, not in the board book archive, nothing. No initials, no timestamp, no indication I had even seen the final revision. Because I hadn't. Because Martin had tried to skip the part where people like me get to say no. By noon, things got weird. The CTO walked into a standing architecture sink and asked, loudly, why their system's access to my old compliance environment was frozen. Apparently, someone had tried to modify the permissions on the Class F audit trail folder and ran headfirst into a hard-coded lockout protocol. Smart move, Martin. Strip someone out of the hierarchy without checking the keys they still hold. Then the finance team started pinging one another in panicked Slack threads, asking why the merger timeline, which had previously been updated daily, now showed a bold red line marked pending internal clearance. No one knew who added it. I did. I had set up that field myself years ago, embedded into the project planning template. It triggered whenever any required governance checkpoint was left unresolved beyond 72 hours. My name was still listed as custodian of the Class F blocker clause in the governance matrix. No override had been filed. No successor named. And without that clearance, the tracker flipped to pending. They couldn't even get the wiki open. I know that because someone in infrastructure must have tried to pull access logs. The page was locked. A single line displayed at the top. Access restricted pending Class F custodian approval. It didn't say my name, but it didn't need to. Martin, of course, tried to act like nothing was wrong. He hosted the Thursday stand-up like he was reading a bedtime story. "We're making great progress," he said. "Just a few final details to align on." But his tone was flat, too cheerful, and legal wasn't smiling, not even pretending. They were busy, quietly checking timestamps, rebuilding trails, digging through every back door that had once looked like a shortcut and now looked like a breach. From where I sat, off-site, logged out, and very much still watching. I could feel it. The stall. That slow, choking stall of a machine grinding into a wall it didn't think existed. No one had seen the waiver, because it didn't exist, because I never signed it, because Martin thought power was louder than process. And now? The process was whispering louder than any of them could scream. Martin started the meeting like a man with a glass jaw pretending he liked getting punched, smiling too wide, talking too fast, thanking everyone for getting us to the finish line. You could tell he was banking on momentum, hoping the sheer size of the deal would bulldoze the fine print. Around the table sat every heavy hitter with skin in the game, 2 senior partners from the acquiring firm, outside counsel from both sides, the entire board, and CFO Daniel Corin, who looked like he hadn't slept in 3 days. The room smelled like cedar, toner, and ego. They'd printed out the documents for optics. Everyone still signs digitally now, but big money likes the ritual. 8 copies, spiral bound, tabs marked for initialing, and at the top of each, proposed agreement and plan of merger, subject to final approval. They got through the first page, the standard boilerplate. Martin made a joke about how far the company had come since its Series A. Corin gave a half-hearted chuckle. Then someone flipped to page 2 and the temperature dropped like a stone in a lake. Corin's eyes scanned faster, then slower. His face went slack. Then he froze. Silence. The acquiring firm's general counsel looked up, puzzled. Something wrong? Corin didn't answer right away. He just leaned toward Martin, voice barely above a whisper, but sharp enough to slice through the room. Please tell me you didn't fire the only person who can block this deal. Martin blinked. What? Corin slid the page toward him, finger tapping under the paragraph titled Class F Governance Consent Requirement. The clause wasn't buried. It wasn't hidden. It was bolded. 1 sentence. This agreement shall not proceed without affirmative signature of the Class F custodian of record. Below it, in black and white, my name, my original title, my share ID, a line marked signature. And beneath that, nothing. Not a squiggle, not a date, not a ghost of a consent. Just air. Martin stared like he was trying to will ink onto the paper. His mouth opened. Closed. Opened again. We issued a waiver. No, Corin cut him off. You tried, but it was never signed. And this, he jabbed the document, was reaffirmed last fiscal year. I signed it myself. It's on record. And there it was. The trap door Martin thought he'd danced over had opened under his feet, because the clause wasn't old. It wasn't outdated. It had been recertified in the last audit cycle, less than 11 months ago, by legal, by the board, and by the man now holding the paper in shaking hands. The acquiring firm's lead counsel cleared his throat. Let me be crystal clear. You're telling me the mandatory Class F consent was neither obtained nor documented? Silence. Martin shifted in his seat, sweat starting to pool beneath his collar. We believed it was implied. Implied? The acquirer's GC barked. There's nothing implied in a mandatory consent clause. Outside counsel leaned back, arms crossed, already distancing themselves. I wasn't there. I didn't need to be. My name was. My silence was. And it spoke louder than anything I could have said. For months, Martin had assumed process was paperwork, bureaucratic lint to brush aside. But now it wasn't just a clause. It was a wall, and his entire deal had just smashed into it. The same CFO who once brushed off my role as legacy governance deadweight was now holding the paper like it had caught fire in his hands. My name, my title, my line, unsigned. They thought I was gone, but I'd never left the room. The panic didn't start with a bang. It leaked in like smoke. Silent at first, then choking. Martin tried to hold the room together after Corin's whisper detonated on page 2, but his voice cracked before the first sentence left his mouth. Legal scrambled, chairs scraped. Someone spilled water trying to unclip a binder, and the acquirer's general counsel calmly, almost gently, closed her folder. I think we should pause, she said. There appears to be a governance defect. That word, defect, landed like a bullet. No one argued, because when outside counsel uses a word like that in a room worth $200 million, the game is no longer about negotiation. It's about triage. Within the hour, I started getting signals. My phone lit up with a soft ping from our old compliance Slack, a private channel I'd been locked out of since my offboarding. The message came from legal's senior partner, was reviewing final consent documents. Can you confirm last known disposition of Class F authority? Which was lawyer speak for, please tell us we didn't screw this up as badly as it looks. I didn't answer. Minutes later, another message. More urgent this time, from Martin's own EA. Martin would like to speak with you today. We'd like to formally reinstate your advisory title. Please advise on availability. I read it once. Archived it. There was no reinstatement to offer. You can't revoke a position that wasn't optional to begin with. The Class F role wasn't tied to salary or titles. It was written into the corporate DNA, part of the company's charter. And unless they rewrote the entire governance structure, which would take a board vote, external filings, and regulatory review, that seat belonged to me until I gave it up, which I hadn't, which I wouldn't. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, they tried to force a retroactive fix. Word got back to me that legal attempted to backdate a signature page, hoping to slide it into the file like it had always been there. But the system wouldn't let them. Because when I negotiated Class F, I'd insisted on a third-party blockchain signature ledger. Every interaction tied to those shares had to be cryptographically logged. Every modification, every timestamp, every access event. The moment they tried to spoof my consent, the ledger rejected the record. Immutable, time-locked, and most damning of all, public. So instead, they pivoted. They began drafting a new resolution, one that could nominate a temporary proxy in my place, a mirror vote, a placeholder. But even that fell apart, because the clause didn't allow for substitution. It didn't say Class F or designee, it said custodian of record, singular, named, explicit, me. The acquirer's legal team wasn't amused. I heard they issued a formal pause notice. Governance compliance deficiency unresolved. All further action suspended until verified remediation. They used soft language, but the meaning was loud and clear. Martin tried again later that evening. A second message, this time directly from him. Let's put this behind us. I'm authorizing full reinstatement, back pay for advisory fees, and open access to all committee materials. We need alignment. Please advise. I didn't respond. It wasn't silence out of spite. It was boundary. Professional distance. The kind that should have existed from the beginning. Because Martin had mistaken my quiet compliance for permission. And now he was learning the difference. One unsigned page at a time. By Friday morning, they'd thrown everything they had at the wall. Proxy designations, emergency board resolutions, even a desperate petition to Delaware Chancery for provisional authority transfer. None of it held, because they all circled back to the same inescapable fact. The clause wasn't written to bend, it was written to bind. Legal tried to talk around it. They drafted a 27-page memo arguing for functional equivalency through a board-designated mirror vote. They argued that in the spirit of the clause, the board could act collectively in place of the individual custodian if that custodian was no longer formally participating. Cute. But spirit doesn't beat signature. The original language wasn't vague. It wasn't a suggestion. It read, no merger, acquisition, or sale exceeding $50 million shall proceed without the recorded affirmative consent of the Class F holder of record. Not council. Not committee. Not a mirror block. Me. They even reached out to the original firm that had helped me draft the clause a decade ago, Sutter and Roth. But that backfired too, because when asked whether the clause allowed for proxy or delegation, the partner replied flatly, no. It was intentionally structured to be custodial. One seat, one voice, one signature. 3 days. That's how long they spun in circles. 91 hours of internal war rooms, lawyer calls, red lines, and caffeine-soaked whiteboards trying to unravel something that was never meant to be unraveled. It wasn't a trap. It was a lock. And I held the key. I just chose not to use it. The final blow came quietly, buried in a board call transcript I wasn't invited to, but got my hands on anyway. During a compliance recap, Martin was asked directly by outside counsel, can you confirm that the Class F custodian reviewed and executed the merger waiver? His voice was flat. You could almost hear the acid in his throat. No, he said. The waiver was presented. It was not signed. There it was, admitted, on record, stamped into the audit trail for anyone to pull, from shareholders to regulators to the acquirer's due diligence team. At that moment, the acquirer had two choices: proceed into breach and risk litigation, or walk. And they weren't stupid. What they didn't know was that I'd already sealed the door before they even reached it. On the same day, Martin handed me that waiver like a parking ticket. I exported the unsigned PDF, time-stamped it, hashed it, and uploaded it directly into the board's read-only audit archive. No one noticed, but it sat there, silent, immutable, waiting. When legal pulled it 3 days later, they realized it had been in the system the entire time. The metadata didn't lie. Uploaded from my account 5 minutes after I left the room, labeled Class F, no signature recorded. No vengeance, no speeches, no chaos, just a blank line. Preserved, untouched, and louder than any signature ever could have been. I knew he'd call eventually. Not an assistant, not legal, not one of the jittery board members trying to save face. Him. Direct. Personal. Like we were going to pretend this was still salvageable with a few well-rehearsed sentences and a handshake. It came in at 7:46 p.m. on a Sunday. He waited until just late enough to signal desperation, but early enough to suggest control. Classic Martin timing. I let it ring twice before answering. Let him sit in it. His voice was steady but hollow, like someone reading a eulogy they didn't write. We'd like to reinstate your full rights. Advisory role, board observer status, whatever you need. Let's just bring this back together and close. Not sorry. Not wrong. Just let's. Like we were teammates cleaning up a fumbled play instead of adversaries staring down the wreckage of his arrogance. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't gloat. I didn't even pause long. The shares were never about the title, I said. They were about the clause. Silence on his end. And I knew in that pause he finally got it. That all the dinners, the performance bonuses, the polished PowerPoints, they were fluff. He'd built his empire on charisma and shortcuts. I'd built my clause like a landmine, calm, buried, waiting for ego to step on it. He tried one more pivot. We can create a governance amendment, a proxy option, something cleaner, more flexible. I already referred someone, I said. You'll be hearing from Donovan Wright. Another pause. Donovan had been my protege during the 2015 audit overhaul. Quiet, sharp, terrifying in a deposition. Martin hated him, said he had no warmth, which from Martin was a compliment in disguise. But Donovan knew the clause, knew the law, knew exactly how to hold that seat and not flinch. He'll act as custodian going forward, I continued. Once full compliance remediation is in place, independent audit, updated charters, SEC confirmation of governance alignment. Then, and only then, you'll have your signature. Martin exhaled, long and slow. He knew it was over. Not because I said no, but because I didn't offer anything else. I wasn't angry. I was done. And the irony? The aggressive consolidation roadmap, the same one he'd bragged about on stage in Vegas, said would define his legacy, was now shelved indefinitely. Not because of market headwinds, not because of regulatory hurdles, but because of one clause he'd dismissed as symbolic. One line he tried to erase without reading it. He built a plan to acquire 3 companies in 18 months, and it died in 18 seconds because I didn't sign. I ended the call with a simple truth he couldn't spin. Governance isn't paperwork, Martin. It's memory. Then I hung up. Not with bitterness, with clarity. 2 weeks later, they let it die quietly. No press release, no shareholder email, just a polite line buried in a quarterly update from the acquiring firm. After careful consideration, we have elected not to proceed with the proposed transaction at this time. Internally, it was less graceful. The deal team scattered. Their GC resigned 2 days after the announcement. At least 3 of our own board members stepped down by the end of the fiscal quarter, 2 citing personal reasons, one with a curt note about alignment challenges. And Martin? Still CEO, still posturing, but noticeably quieter, his calendar suddenly very available. His LinkedIn headline no longer mentioned mergers or expansion, just strategic leadership in evolving markets. Whatever that means. I didn't call anyone. I didn't offer commentary. The only reason I knew the final nail had been hammered in was because Donovan sent me a screenshot from the acquirer's board minutes. Governance instability could not be sufficiently resolved to satisfy risk thresholds. That's how they phrased it. Corporate poetry for, they couldn't figure out how to override the one person they thought didn't matter. My Class F shares stayed right where they'd always been. Not transferable, not saleable, but very much alive. I still had my custodian designation, still had my audit access. The clause was still in place, untouched, preserved exactly as I wrote it over a decade ago. And now, everyone in that room knew what it meant. The funniest part? It wasn't even meant to be a weapon. It was a safeguard. A quiet boundary written by a woman who'd spent too many years being told governance was someone else's job. That policy was a formality. That legal was just a bottleneck. I had drafted the clause to ensure no one, no CEO, no board, no wave of swaggering visionaries that could walk in and erase hard-won structure with a smirk and a signature. They tried anyway, and failed. The following year, I picked up the new annual report out of habit. It was thinner, less celebratory. I flipped past the front pages, past the recycled mission statements and canned year-in-review paragraphs. Near the back, buried under footnotes and filing statements, I saw it. Line item 14B. Merger proceedings suspended pending Class F signatory realignment. That was it. No elaboration, no apology, just a sentence that, if you knew what it meant, told you everything. I read it over coffee. No smile, no bitterness either. Just the stillness of a story told without a word. Because sometimes the most powerful vote, the one that stops everything, that holds the line, that rewrites the ending, is the one that stays unsigned.